Inside the nursing home, elderly residents, clad in thick clothing, sat in wheelchairs. A caregiver's gentle voice echoed in my ears. Writing poetry isn't that difficult. Just write down what you want to say, and that's a poem. Poetry doesn't need fancy words. It's simply the echo of the heart. The elders joined in, picking up crayons of various colors and writing down their thoughts. Among the crowd, one elderly woman stood out with a particularly calm demeanor. Her name was Oh-ae-sun. Though her face was aged, she remained refined. Her yellow and white sweater was embellished with floral patterns, and a colorful silk scarf was elegantly tied around her neck. Her silver hair was neatly combed, and the most eye-catching thing was that a small pink flower hairpin was pinned against the white, a gentle and playful touch. Ae-sun gazed at the white paper before her eyes deep and thoughtful for a long time. She picked up a blue crayon and calmly sketched on the paper. In a trance, crayons rippled into waves, undulating with the wind, outlining the boundless ocean. Ae-sun's turbulent emotions dissolved into a low monologue, dissipating on the sea breeze. Before, Ae-sun had never imagined she would live to be 70, much less anticipated that the words she would most want to say at 70 would be the words she often said as a child, Mom. Amidst the rustling of waves, time slipped back and the story returned to Jeju Island in 1960. That year, Ae-sun was only 9 years old, the beautiful early spring of her life just beginning, and her inextricable bond with poetry quietly began. A short poem won Ae-sun second place in a school competition. She excitedly ran to the beach, calling out for her mother. Ae-sun's mother, John Gwang-rai, was a Hye-kyo seawoman from the island. Hye-kyo make their living by fishing, donning scuba gear and diving into the ocean all day, braving the turbulent waves to eke out a living. This is arduous labor, dependent not only on weather conditions, but also on the constant, relentless contact with the seawater, which has long seeped into the bones, turning into a piercing heat that continuously scorches life energy and depletes future health. On Jeju Island, no one would choose to become a Hye-kyo unless they were driven by necessity. Sadly, these women who fled and hastily settled on Jeju Island had no other choice. Becoming a Hye-kyo can even be a form of salvation. At least they no longer have to beg and can support themselves with their own hands. Gwang-rai is one of them, immersed in the sea day after day, tirelessly pursuing the most precious abalone. Though Ae-sun cried out at the beach, her voice nearly hoarse, her mother was unable to respond. For Gwang-rai, making money was clearly more important than sharing the joy of a poem. Ae-sun was gloomy. Behind her stood a boy named Gwan-sik, the son of a fishmonger. He had been secretly in love with Ae-sun since childhood, but Ae-sun remained indifferent, even a little disgusted with him. Even so, Gwan-sik remained fascinated by her and could not help but follow her. The Hye-kyo, diversified women, watched them, teasing them kindly. If a Hye-kyo's daughter marries a fishmonger's son, the entire Jeju Sea will belong to her. Ae-sun, however, was not in the mood for jokes. She was still troubled by the string of setbacks. Not only did her mother have no time to appreciate her award-winning poem, she also forbade her from going home with her. Gwang-rai's fate was tragic. After she and her first husband had Ae-sun, he tragically died young. Because of this, Gwang-rai was labeled a husband killer. Desperate, she left the Wu family and sought alternative livelihoods. She later met her second husband and gave birth to 2 children. She thought her life would gradually improve, but her husband's indolence forced Gwang-rai to shoulder the burden of supporting the family alone. Therefore, Gwang-rai was reluctant to bring Ae-sun with her, fearing she would become the family's full-time caregiver. More importantly, she was penniless and could barely make ends meet. Even if she wanted Ae-sun to go to school, she couldn't. Only by staying with her ex-husband could Ae-sun study and seize the opportunity to change her life. Gwang-rai appeared indifferent, but in reality, she dedicated herself to her daughter's future with deep maternal love. Ae-sun was intelligent and understood her mother's painstaking efforts, but she was still a child, and she couldn't hide her grievance at not being able to be with her mother. So she followed her mother like a little tail, nagging and complaining nonstop. Gwang-rai spoke of her disdain, but in reality, she responded to every word, cherishing this fleeting moment of stolen time with her daughter. Ae-sun was like a thorn in her side, weighing on her every joy and sorrow. Gwang-rai knew that without a father, Ae-sun was alone and miserable in the Wu family. Her cousin was inferior to her in every way, yet, simply because he was a boy, he was doted on. Her uncle was unfair, and although her grandmother often mediated, he always deliberately gave Ae-sun less of the yellow croaker when sharing it. Even though Ae-sun was an excellent student, she was not exempt from this. Hearing this, Gwang-rai was heartbroken, but for the sake of her daughter's future, she reluctantly sent her away. Tolerating it would not win sympathy, but would only lead to harsher treatment. Ae-sun had no yellow croaker to eat at the Wu families, and she was forced to work hard and endure cold words. One day, finally, Gwang-rai could no longer tolerate it. She stormed into the Wu family's house with several yellow croakers, causing a scene and taking her daughter, who was washing dishes, away. Ironically, only by risking her life and becoming a shrew can a woman earn the respect she deserves amidst the fear of others. On the way home, a pale moon shone over the sea, and the sound of waves gently lapped against the jagged rocks. Gwang-rai carried a lantern, and Ae-sun followed behind, looking at her mother happily. She secretly felt thankful that the Wu family hadn't given her the yellow croaker, and now she could finally live with her mother. Gwang-rai, amused and embarrassed, asked Ae-sun why she loved her so much. Ae-sun raised her head and answered clearly, "Because you're my mother." Gwang-rai teased, "If you like her, grow up quickly and give her 101 a day." Ae-sun's eyes lit up, thrilled her mother had read her poem. Gwang-rai said, though she meant it, that writing poetry was useless. In reality, she treasured her daughter's poem and was deeply proud of her. The lovely little poem was called Stupid Abalone. Just a few words brought Gwang-rai to tears. She secretly resolved that no matter how difficult it might be, she would ensure Ae-sun continued her studies and lived a different life. However, a seemingly insignificant incident soon revealed a cruel reality. One day, Ae-sun was elected vice class monitor, but she burst into tears at home. Gwang-rai had initially assumed her daughter was simply too ambitious and too demanding of herself. But Gwan-sik revealed that Ae-sun had lost to a classmate with connections. Even though she received the most votes, the teacher gave the class monitor position to another boy. This boy, simply because he came from a prominent family, had parents who were well-versed in social etiquette and often gave gifts to teachers and maintained personal relationships. It was this boy who snatched the first prize in the poetry competition. Faced with the vast disparity between the rich and the poor, fairness becomes a mockery. The sons of the rich thrive, while the sons of the poor resign themselves to being stepping stones. Gwang-rai, furious, worked herself to the bone like an ox, plowing the fields until she borrowed a pearl necklace. Then, she changed into her most expensive outfit and went to school to ask the homeroom teacher to support her daughter. Sadly, despite her rage, Gwang-rai wasn't seeking a fight. Instead, she wanted to give the teacher a gift. Gwang-rai quietly hid the new banknotes in the gift box and gestured awkwardly. This resilient mother willingly lowered her profile for her daughter, carefully trying to please others. However, Gwang-rai never shared these hardships with her daughter. Despite her hardships, she believed her daughter deserved a life far different from hers. Gwang-rai encouraged Ae-sun not to settle for less, but to live a fulfilling life, fully supporting her in everything she pursued. Though her mother never expressed it, the intelligent Ae-sun understood her mother's silent dedication. Understanding her, she no longer hesitated, but instead, with a bright smile, firmly told her mother that being vice class monitor would be just as good. When she grew up, the first thing she would do was buy her mother a pearl necklace that was truly hers. In the new spring, mother and daughter leaned on each other, their lives fraught with hardship yet vibrant with life. Ae-sun, like a young seedling, grew up under her mother's shade. Spring holds promise, but it's all too fleeting. Chun-hwa passed away, and Gwang-rai's life came to an abrupt end. Respiratory disease was the curse of the Hye-kyo. Gwang-rai grew thinner and thinner, yet she still struggled to go into the sea. The Hye-kyo of Jeju Island shared life and death, and they all came to Gwang-rai's home, urging her to take good care of her illness. However, no one could stop the march of death. Gwang-rai's body was extremely weak, and she knew her end was near. The Hye-kyo never feared death, but only feared leaving their orphan children behind. Gwang-rai gazed at her daughter, her eyes filled with longing. Gwang-rai told Ae-sun that as soon as her mother passed away, she should immediately return to the Wu family and ask her uncle to support her education. Ae-sun found it hard to accept, even at such a young age. She had already tasted the bitterness of death. But Gwang-rai insisted that in this world, no matter who left, her life would go on. It was July 1961. 10-year-old Ae-sun lay on her mother's lap for the last time, hearing her final words. Gwang-rai, like a wave, struggled and surged before quietly sinking into the sea. After Gwang-rai's passing, Ae-sun broke down in tears. Gwan-sik remained by her side. Unable to find words of comfort, he simply passed Ae-sun food. Filling his stomach gave him the strength to cry. As soon as her mother passed away, Ae-sun missed her. This longing would never fade. It would only grow stronger, a lifelong companion. The vibrant crimson of the impatiens on her mother's fingertips faded, and tender cabbage sprouts sprouted from the barren fields. Time slipped through her fingers like sand, and the living were ultimately pushed along by the passage of time. Her mother hadn't lied to her. Life went on. Sadly, the very thing Gwang-rai feared most came true. Her stepfather pleaded earnestly, promising to pay for A-sun's college education. A-sun, reluctant to leave her younger siblings behind, ultimately chose to stay. 6 years passed, and A-sun had grown into a young woman. She still loved literature, often wearing a uniform and sitting at a cabbage stall with a book, looking out of place in the bustling market. Gwan-sik, his baby fat gone, now towering like a tree, still stubbornly stayed by A-sun's side, hawking and collecting cash for her, earning her the teasing of the Hye-kyo. Gwan-sik's grandmother, seeing her grandson's unwavering affection for A-sun, was furious at her lack of resistance and headed straight to the market to confront her. Gwan-sik hurriedly escorted A-sun away, but A-sun turned back to challenge him before leaving. Young love is always subject to such turmoil. In the spring of 1967, 16-year-old A-sun, in her prime, had a clear gaze and a rebellious literary spirit, seemingly gravitating towards a quiet desk rather than a bustling market. She was adept at discovering beauty, but shy about hawking her cabbages. A-sun harbored countless visions of the distant future, university, leaving Jeju Island. Remarkably, in all her fantasies, Gwan-sik loomed large. At the time, A-sun hadn't yet realized the bond between them that would entangle her for a lifetime. She felt a mixture of love and hate for Gwan-sik, loving his thoughtfulness and resenting his aloofness. Gwan-sik accepted both his deep love and deep hatred. He understood that A-sun's sharp edge was merely a disguise for self-protection. A natural poet, she was born at the wrong time, trapped on this cramped island, and having lost her mother prematurely, she was left alone. Gwan-sik could see the radiance in A-sun. In his heart, A-sun was precious, a woman who should have been destined for a wider world. Gwan-sik considered it a great honor to be by A-sun's side. Unfortunately, his family didn't share that sentiment. Gwan-sik's grandmother was a shaman. Jeju Island thrives on fishing and has long worshipped the Sea Dragon King. Shamans, as mediums of mystical power, were a privilege unchallenged. She insisted that Gwan-rai's ghost lingered, encouraging A-sun to seduce Gwan-sik, causing unrest in the Liang family. The naked malice pierced A-sun's most sensitive nerves. She cared more about dignity than love, and could only use sharp words to draw a line. A-sun said she despised Gwan-sik and would never marry him. One day, she would bow to Seoul. Despite this, her hand remained firmly in Gwan-sik's pocket. The two walked side by side in the rapeseed fields, awkward yet sweet. In fact, as early as 14 years old, A-sun had been moved and also fell in love with Gwan-sik. However, Gwan-sik only treated A-sun with pervasive kindness, unable to express it in words. A-sun was furious and anxious, and Gwan-sik's grandmother's disdain only exacerbated her anxiety. A-sun deliberately questioned Gwan-sik, asking if his care for her over the years had been nearly out of sympathy. Gwan-sik's rage seized him, and in the chaos, the two began to argue. In a moment of desperation, Gwan-sik kissed A-sun fiercely. Spring arrived in an instant, and the fields of rapeseed blossoms swayed in the wind, like a surging golden ocean, their splendor sweeping the naive young man into love. Years later, that rapeseed field became a symbol of Jeju Island. Watching the tourists passing by on TV, the middle-aged A-sun smiled shyly. A strong floral fragrance wafted from the depths of time, still dizzyingly sweet, like first love. In the springtime of life, love blossoms, filling the heart of a young man. However, spring is unpredictable, with the weather fluctuating between warm and cold, changing so swiftly that one can't be prepared. A-sun's fate was no different. His stepfather married a woman named Min-ok. As soon as Min-ok entered the house, she tried to take down Gwan-rai's portrait, and A-sun flew into a rage. During the argument, she realized her younger siblings had been bribed, while her stepfather remained evasive and silent. Disappointed, A-sun decided to leave. Before leaving, she asked her stepfather for the money for college as agreed. Unexpectedly, her stepfather reneged, and A-sun realized she had been living as a free babysitter for years. Smitten with grief and anger, A-sun recalled her mother's dying words. A-sun returned to the Wu family and begged her uncle to continue supporting her education. But she arrived too late, as her cousin was away on the road and had run up gambling debts. Not only did his uncle not agree to A-sun's request, he instead urged her to work in a factory after graduating from high school to help pay off the family debt. A-sun flatly refused, her despair growing. In her despair, she sought out Gwan-sik. The moment A-sun saw Gwan-sik, she broke down. She gave up her forced composure and burst into tears. Her family ignored her. The only person in the world who cared about her was Gwan-sik. She felt resentful. Why was her fate so unfair? Why, no matter how hard she tried, was she still trapped on Jeju Island? But the next moment, Gwan-sik's actions left Ae-sun frozen in place. As the spring breeze blew across the island at night, he held his head high and recited softly. He was still struggling with words, but he clumsily promised, in this life, he would do 3 things for Ae-sun: send her to college, help her become a poet, and take her away from Jeju Island. Ae-sun burst into tears, angry and moved. She looked at Gwan-sik and couldn't help but exclaim, "You should have said you'd give me everything, even the moon and the stars." The lingering romantic impulses in her heart surged, but were ultimately defeated by his unpretentious sincerity. After a brief period of depression, Ae-sun rallied. As Gwan-rai's daughter, she would never give up so easily. A daring plan gradually took shape. Ae-sun decided to elope and flee to Busan. To avenge Min-ok, Ae-sun took her ring, donned her yellow dress, and took her mother's portrait. Under cover of night, she secretly reunited with Gwan-sik. Gwan-sik also took the golden frog from home and prepared to elope. Before leaving, Ae-sun gave Gwan-sik one last chance to regret. Unexpectedly, the honest Gwan-sik's eyes sparkled with excitement. So, the two decided to plan their departure from Jeju Island. Once in Busan, Gwan-sik found factory work, and Ae-sun took the college entrance exam. As long as they worked hard, there was always a way out. Reality was far more cruel than they had imagined, and their elopement was destined to become a farce. At the time, South Korea was commemorating the May 16th military coup, with celebrations held across the country. To prevent rebellion, strict security measures were implemented everywhere. In this conservative society, preventing women and minors from running away became a top priority. Without ID cards, Ae-sun and Gwan-sik had to pretend to be newlyweds and feign composure to pass the ship's inspection. However, upon arriving in Busan, they were unfortunately pickpocketed, and due to their questionable identities, the pawnshop owner repeatedly refused them money. Although they had a large amount of gold and silver jewelry with them, they were unable to exchange it. At this point, a kind couple took them in. Not only did they invite them to stay in their family's guest house, they also thoughtfully provided them with bedding and hot meals. The proprietress smiled brightly and said warmly, "Busan people are very generous." Ae-sun and Gwan-sik were deeply touched, completely unaware that this was an elaborate scam. It turned out to be a shady shop. The couple who owned it were like a male and female villain. While appearing kind, they secretly used obscure bills to maliciously inflate prices and even broke into customers' rooms at night to steal valuable luggage. Ae-sun and Gwan-sik were completely unsuspecting and only realized they had fallen into a trap when they woke up the next day. They argued for the return of the portrait and the golden frog, but the proprietress suddenly became forceful, insisting they hadn't taken their luggage and threatening them with their status, forcing them to leave. The perceptive proprietress had already realized that this young couple was not a newlywed couple on their honeymoon, but rather minors who had run away. Thus, she was certain they wouldn't dare to call the police, so she had to swallow her anger and consider herself unlucky. However, she had underestimated the rebellious girl's stubbornness. Ae-sun and Gwan-rai were equally stubborn, unable to let go of the incident. So, she took Gwan-sik and sneaked into the hotel, where she first told the new tenant the truth and kindly reminded her not to turn off the lights when she went to bed. The lights upstairs hadn't been turned off for a long time, leaving the innkeepers frustrated. They put their plans on hold and instead planned to make a killing on the drinks bill. Ae-sun and Gwan-sik hid in the darkness, waiting for the two to fall asleep before retrieving their belongings. They planned to steal the cash box as compensation if they couldn't find their luggage. Gwan-sik was initially trembling with nervousness, but Ae-sun's encouragement at that crucial moment soared his blood, instantly forgetting his fear. After carefully searching the room to no avail, they decided to take the cash box. Just as they were about to succeed, Ae-sun discovered the hairpin Gwan-sik had given her, a token of their love, on the little girl's head. Ae-sun insisted on retrieving the money, but was thus exposed. The hotel couple awoke in shock. Gwan-sik fled with the cash box, but Ae-sun was a step too slow and was tackled by the landlady. At this critical moment, Gwan-sik capitalized on his athletic prowess. He pretended to abandon the cash box and, catching the landlady off guard, charged at her at the speed of a 100-meter sprint. Not to be outdone, Ae-sun grabbed the landlady's hair, turning the tables. That night, the young men's love story in Busan ended in a hilarious fashion, amidst blood, wounds, and insults. Afterward, the two were taken to the police station, where the officers were rude and suspected them of being spies. Faced with power, Ae-sik argued with reason fearlessly. However, when Gwan-sik's mother hurriedly arrived, she lowered her head in guilt. After the two disappeared, the Liang family immediately called the police and anxiously searched for them. Gwan-sik's mother even slept outside the police station, only then receiving the news. Interestingly, Min-ok, also a victim of theft, remained remarkably calm, even indulgent. She didn't care about the jewelry and clothes. Instead, she admired Ae-sun's courage in venturing out for love and her dreams. As a fellow woman, she empathized. Though seemingly opposed, they were not enemies. They were simply protecting what was precious to each other. In the years that followed, Ae-sun and Min-ok's interactions continued. Across the vast expanse of Jeju Island and Busan, a special bond quietly grew. At this moment, a moment of courage led to disaster. This impulsive night escape set off an unforeseen chain reaction, ultimately plunging Ae-sun into an abyss of no return. Gwan-sik's mother, using a subtle trick, helped them retrieve their luggage and took the couple from the hotel to the police station. She didn't blame Ae-sun, but upon returning to Jeju Island, a storm swept over. The scandal of her unmarried elopement spread throughout Jeju Island, and Ae-sun was expelled from school, completely losing her chance at education. Ironically, Gwan-sik escaped unscathed. While both elopements were considered brave by men, the women were stigmatized as shameless. Faced with blatant discrimination and injustice, Gwan-sik did not remain silent. Instead, he stood up and fought for justice for Ae-sun, but ultimately failed. After this incident, the Liang family grew increasingly disgusted with Ae-sun and demanded their separation. Despite being placed under house arrest, Gwan-sik remained steadfast in his protest, going on a hunger strike to demonstrate his determination to marry no one but Ae-sun. However, fate took a sudden turn, and he was caught off guard by the devastating news. Ae-sun was about to marry someone else. It turned out that the Wu family was equally furious. Ae-sun lacked a degree, carried a stigma, and couldn't even get a job at the factory. Since this was the case, marrying Ae-sun off early would save the family food and earn her a dowry subsidy. The Liang family refused to budge, leaving them with no choice but to look for another. The Wu family then set their sights on Captain Vu Sang-gil. Sang-gil was wealthy and powerful, possessing a virtual monopoly on the boats in Dodong-ri, and his brother was the president of the Fishermen's Association. However, he was attracted by Ae-sun's youth, beauty, and experience raising younger siblings and intended to keep her at home, both to care for the children and serve as a domestic servant. Ae-sun's damaged reputation presented him with an opportunity. Sang-gil had already planned this, but he feigned magnanimity, claiming he acted like a sole native. As long as Ae-sun obeyed, he would forgive any past misdeeds. The two met for the first time at a cafe. Sang-gil was rude and, despite his wealth, he was greedy. Ae-sun lowered her head and endured silently, seemingly powerless to resist. However, Gwan-sik refused to accept his fate. He snatched Ae-sun from her right in front of Sang-gil, who angrily rebuked him. Gwan-sik ignored him, clutching Ae-sun's hand tightly and heading straight for the rapeseed field. Gwan-sik, slightly flustered, placed the ring on her finger and hastily proposed. Gwan-sik had secretly purchased the ring in Busan. He had begged the jewelry store owner profusely, ultimately using his entire savings to obtain it. Gwan-sik secretly vowed to marry Ae-sun, even if it meant breaking up with his family. However, Ae-sun threw the ring away. Ae-sun told Gwan-sik that Sang-gil would allow her to go to university, become a poet in Seoul. Ae-sun hated the injustice of fate and could not endure a marriage of poverty. Now Gwan-sik was a stumbling block to her, and only if he left could Ae-sun find her a better life. Hearing this, Gwan-sik was heartbroken. Although he was reluctant, he respected Ae-sun's choice.